next story, the bankers, the Eurogroup head says that looting of bank accounts in Cyprus is a template for the EU. This is the Dutch finance minister and president of the Eurogroup of Eurozone finance ministers, Jurgen Dijsselbloem, I believe is the way you pronounce his name. It's Dutch. But what he said is this. He said, if there's a risk in a bank, our first question should be, okay, what are you in the bank going to do about that? What can you do to recapitalize yourself? If the bank can't do it, then we'll talk to the shareholders and the bondholders, and we'll ask them to contribute in recapitalizing the bank. And if necessary, the uninsured deposit holders. Now, what he means by uninsured deposit holders is anyone who's unfortunate enough to not have squirreled away more than 100,000 euros in a particular bank. But notice how this is being spun. Okay, this is not, he's talking about this as if it was a particular bank that was failing. Now, if you had your money in a bank and you had more than the insured amount, of course you understand that that money is at risk, and stockholders and bondholders in a bank should be accepting that risk. But they're not. That's not what we saw in the United States. We saw the privatization of profits, and we saw the socialization of losses. And what he's talking about here in this bank situation is not money that is being taken because a bank failed. This is money that's being taken out of bank accounts because the politicians in the country failed. It's because of political national debt that they're seizing these private accounts, and that's a tremendous difference. Listen to what the another economist there said, or another banker said, Jörg Kramer, chief economist of the German Commerzbank. He called for private savings accounts in Italy to be similarly plundered. He said a tax rate of 15% on financial assets would probably be enough to push the Italian government debt to below the critical level of 100% of gross domestic product. But as Zero Hedge reports, by calling the Cyprus looting a bank restructuring and not a tax, technocrats were able to bypass the democratic process. So what we're seeing is we're seeing all these new terms being invented to cover up what they're really doing. Instead of calling themselves unelected bankers who do a coup in a country and take it over, they call themselves technocrats. Instead of calling the seizing of assets for political purpose and national debt, instead of calling that a tax, or instead of calling it theft, they call it a haircut. But by any other name, it's the same thing. Now, Zero Hedge also reports that the Russians have possibly already quietly withdrawn all of their cash from Cyprus. Zero Hedge says yesterday they reported that despite the closed banks and the capital controls, the local financial system has been leaking cash, lots and lots of cash. The result, at least for Europe, is quite scary because let's recall that the primary political purpose of destroying the Cyprus financial system was simply to punish and humiliate Russian billionaire oligarchs who had held tens of billions in unsecured deposits with the island nation's two biggest banks. As it turns out, these same oligarchs may have used the one-week hiatus period of total chaos in the banking system to transfer the bulk of the cash they had deposited with one of the two main Cypriot banks, in the process making the whole punitive point of collapsing the Cyprus financial system entirely moot. Well, the justification for doing these types of government theft on a large scale is typically by playing a class envy card, or even by playing, as in this case, not only a class envy card, but a foreigner versus us card. Say, we're going to get the rich people and we're going to get the rich foreigners, the rich Russians here. But in reality, they didn't pay anything. As has been said, most regulations are like a spider web that catches the small flies, but let the large bees go right through. And that's exactly what we see happening here. The really big guys don't get touched by this stuff. It's really just the middle class and upper middle class and lower class who wind up paying these things. And even if they were getting hit hard or as hard or harder, why would that make you feel any better about the fact that your money is being stolen out of your account? Now, the next thing is in the banking information here is BRICS. Have you ever heard of BRICS? That's B-R-I-C-S. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. You recall they also have a group of countries that are kind of the core of the EU problem. They call them the pigs: Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. Well, these BRICS may be the pinprick that burst the dollar bubble. It says in the article by Mike Cohen and Ilya Arkhipov, it says the biggest emerging markets are uniting to tackle underdevelopment and currency volatility with plans to set up institutions that encroach on the roles of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. These countries are going to have an economy by the year 2020 that is roughly the size of the U.S. economy. And the article goes on to say the deepest rationale for the BRICS is almost certainly the creation of a new Bretton Woods-type institutions that are inclined toward the developing world. They will have $4.4 trillion, and they will account for 43% of the world's population. Now, if you recall, the Bretton Woods Accord was something that essentially set up the dollar as a standard of exchange and took off the gold standard and a lot of other things. So what we're looking at here is a major shift of power away from the dollar. And what that's going to do is make things a great deal more economically difficult for those of us here in America. We've been kind of following this dollar bubble and living off of it, getting a lot of our goods cheaper than they will be if we have a different standard of currency.
Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.